Hello. So, as you may know, I find early explorers fascinating. The thrill of seeking that which hasn't been seen before or done before, and the danger of that. What would you find there? How would you get there? And could you get back home? Professor Solomon August Andree of Sweden was an engineer who wanted to discover and sail over the North Pole, where Santa Claus lives. He was born in 1854 in Grenna, Sweden, the son of a chemist. So how on God's green earth was he planning to get there? We didn't have planes. Trains were not up in the Arctic. We didn't have automobiles. So how? By balloon. The newspapers mentioned this feat in 1895, saying that it was attracting the attention of geographers and scientists. To explore the Arctic by air was intriguing to Andree, and he submitted to the Academy of Sciences his plan to drift across the North Pole by balloon, estimating the cost to be about $36,000. King Oscar II of Sweden would provide $8,000 of the money to send Andree on this expedition. Alfred Nobel, yes, that Nobel, contributed $16,000. Andree was the chief examiner of the Swedish Patent Office and was in his early 40s at this point. It is said that Andree does not follow ballooning for pleasure or notoriety, but solely for the enrichment of science. 1895 and 1896, he worked on the balloon. Once completed, he sailed for Spitsbergen the spring of 1896, taking with him a group of scientists and workers to establish a base of operations on Dane's Island. A hydrogen gas plant was built to fly the balloon. The balloon was called Eagle. The balloon will be able to handle the weight of 6,600 pounds for 30 days, carrying scientific instruments, a sledge, canvas boat, weaponry and ammunition, ballast and supplies for 4 months, plus carrier pigeons and 13 messenger buoys. It was 67 feet in diameter, 100 feet from basket floor to the top, with a capacity of 170,000 cubic feet. Its speed was 12 to 15 miles per hour. The canvas car was closed in, but had windows so they could look out over the landscape, and had a sleeping compartment with sleeping bags and storage holding various items like textbooks, charts, ammunition, and weapons, sextants, thermometers, cameras, and surveying equipment. Food that was preserved was stored in canvas sacks like chocolate, concentrated milk, and French wines and champagne. 40 to 50 days' supply of gas and food was on board. Now, in this article from August 1895, he had been planning to go in July 1896, but because the weather wasn't just right, and it had to be to fly the balloon safely, he deferred the trip and is now trying again in 1897. He asked for volunteers to come with him on this expedition, and he picked 2 athletic men, Niels Strindberg, mid-20s, who was a meteorologist, aeronaut, photographer, and lover of outdoor sports, and Knut Frankel, also mid-20s, civil engineer, Arctic hunter, champion skater, and snowshoe runner. So like I mentioned before, aviation wasn't much of a thing. There were no airplanes. Count Ferdinand von Zeppelin, awesome name, had just started working on dirigibles. Quote, to go up in a balloon was to trust oneself to the elements to an infinitely greater extent than is the case today, end quote. Brownsville Herald, September 14th, 1930. And the Arctic, what the heck is there? Robert Peary wouldn't reach the North Pole until 12 years later, in 1909. Roald Amundsen had yet to launch his ship into the Northwest Passage. Andree, along with Strindberg and Frankel, left on July 11, 1897, from Dane Island in the Spitsbergen group. Here is what the Evening Public Ledger from October 31, 1916, many years later, would say about the start. Quote, prayers were next said upon the deck of a supply vessel in the harbor, and then the balloon was inflated and its shed unroofed to let it out. It was restless to get underway when the 3 adventurers climbed in at 2:30 in the afternoon, and when the line was cut, it leaped impatiently into the air. After it had gone partway out over the harbor, a contrary wind drove it back for a while, but after barely missing some high cliffs, it found a friendly current, which, catching it just in time, wafted it out over the sea. Then the wind pressed it down until the car dipped into the water, but it soon rose again, cleared the rocks of an isle across the harbor, settled down to a steady progress northward, and vanished from sight at 3 p.m. when traveling about a half-mile above the sea." End quote. Andree had hoped for a breeze blowing 15 miles an hour to the north, which would have helped him move the 700 miles between Spitsbergen and the North Pole in just 2 days, and carry him over the Bering Strait in 6 days. The last news received from Andree was just 2 days after his start, from a carrier pigeon. That report said that he had gone northeasterly at the rate of 3 miles per hour and had gone 150 miles. At noon on July 13th, they were at latitude 82.2 degrees and longitude 15.5 degrees and making good progress. If nothing else had happened weather-wise, he should have gotten to eastern Siberia in about 4 to 6 weeks. But, weather. Supposedly the Arctic winds are a fickle, what. Also pointed out that a balloon is hard to keep gas-tight and buoyant for more than a few days. Ever since then, rumors have abounded as to their fate. November 24th, 1897, from Tromsø, Norway. The steamer Victoria had left on November 5th for Spitsbergen to search for Professor Andree and his companions along with other exploring parties. Nothing seen. Allegedly, and I didn't see this in the newspaper until many years later, but some 2 years after the launch of the balloon, a messenger buoy had been found on the coast of Ireland, which said, quote, "Buoy number 7. This buoy is thrown out from the Andree balloon at 10:55 p.m. GMT, July 11, 1897, at about 82 north latitude and 25 east longitude. We are drifting at an elevation of about 600 meters. All well. Signed, Andree Strindberg Frankel." End quote. August the next year, let's say 1900. A woman on the coast of Finnmark, Norway, picked up what she thought was some wreckage. It was buoy number 4 and had what would be the oldest message of the expedition. Quote, "July 11th, 10 p.m. GMT. This is the first buoy to be thrown out. Our journey has gone well so far. We are drifting at an elevation of about 250 meters with a course which at first was north 10 east true, but later north 45 east true. 4 messenger pigeons were sent out at 5:40 p.m. Greenwich time. They flew westerly. We are now over the ice, which is much broken up. The weather is beautiful. We are in the highest spirits. We have been over broken ice since 7:45 GMT. Andree Strindberg Frankel." Only one of the pigeons ever made it anywhere, unfortunately being shot down by a boat captain who did thankfully go back to retrieve it and reported its message's contents. So no news until about March 1902. Some contradictory information though. The newspapers are saying that 2 years ago, the Hudson Bay Company have reported that Andree and his crew had been killed by Arctic natives. That story was this, quote, "Alston Churchill, factor of the Hudson Bay Company at Churchill, which is the company's most northerly point on the west coast of Hudson Bay, has written that after about 2 years' search, the men sent out by him have returned with a report similar to the one first published. Traces of the daring balloonist and his associates were followed for hundreds of miles, but it was impossible to locate the tribe which caused their death. The story of the searchers is that Arctic natives saw Omiak, one of their largest boats, floating in the air. When it settled to the ground, 3 white men strangely dressed came out with guns, which they indiscreetly fired. Andree and his associates were killed and everything of value taken. The searchers found knives, tobacco, and cartridges supposed to belong to Andree in possession of one of the most northern tribes, but could get no further information. News that Andree undoubtedly met his death at the hands of natives has been forwarded to the Swedish government." End quote. Interestingly, in 1902, the Hudson Bay Company would deny they had ever received any such report. July 1902. Reverend Dr. Farleys from the Church of England arrived in Winnipeg from the Northwest Territory and brought news that 2 years ago, 800 miles north of York, Northwest Territory, a party of natives under the leadership of Old Husky saw the balloon land on a plain of snow some 200 miles north of Fort Churchill. 3 men came out of that balloon. Some of Old Husky's minions approached out of curiosity. One of Andree's crews fired off a gun, which was a signal to the natives to battle. The explorers were killed. All of the expedition's things were taken away to the natives' home. Allegedly, Old Husky gave this information himself to Ralph Alstein of the Hudson Bay Company and was then investigated by the Reverend. The Reverend does not doubt the story, since the natives have been seen in their possession some interesting items like a telescope. Newspapers in this day were not getting stories the day they happened or even the month they happened. The more remote the location of the news that was happening, the harder it was to get news without long delays. I don't know if Hudson Bay Company backtracked, or if they're saying they did not get such a report still remains true at this point. Another article around the same time in July 1902 then goes on to say that the Hudson Bay Company offered a reward for the recovery of any portion of the items belonging to Andree and the explorers. However, the Reverend believes that though the natives have allegedly gone out looking for them, they will be punished if they do bring anything back, as allegedly the natives are now to understand that Andree didn't want to attack them, that the gun going off was an accident. The Hudson Bay Company sent another party to look for the balloon and the explorers in hopes of finding some sort of conclusive evidence. What is interesting is that this one article that expounds on the earlier report about the Reverend actually questions the validity outright. And let me just put it out there right now. Questioning the validity was a valid thing to do. After this point in time, it was never brought up again in the newspapers about the expedition being in any way killed by natives. Not to mention the fact they were nowhere near Canada to boot. Published by the Idaho Springs Siftings newspaper, July 19, 1902. Quote, "The revival of an old story that Andree and his companions were murdered by natives up there raises a number of interesting questions. The first of these relates to the intelligence of the men who from time to time have passed this tale down from Hudson's Bay to civilization, and who pretend to have got it from the natives. In view of the large number of fakes which have been perpetrated since Andree's disappearance in regards to his fate, some doubts may exist as to the honesty of the persons who are responsible for this particular account. But granting their perfect sincerity, it is not inconceivable that they wrongly interpret the facts." Early last March, the same story came from Winnipeg and was attributed to a Mr. Alstein, an agent of the Hudson Bay Company. The officials of that organization, however, briefly discredited it. End quote. So one of those rumors was that Andree had to abandon his balloon due to the lack of buoyancy after flying for a few days, and he had maybe been hundreds or thousands of miles from land. Search parties have looked for him on the east coast of Greenland, in Spitsbergen, Franz Josef Land, the New Siberian Islands, and Siberia. The likelihood of him ending up in one of those places was higher than him reaching Alaska or Canada. And the same newspaper astutely points out that until those supposed relics are located and documented, that believing this story to be true should be taken with caution and skepticism. Abso-positively. Some 4 years later, in 1906, Andree's expedition would be mentioned again, but only because someone else would be attempting something similar. Great, but where are Andree and his team? January 1910, William Irvine, a trader with Hudson Bay Company, allegedly found Andree's balloon at Reindeer Lake. The Danish consul, located in Montreal, wants to send out an expedition to get whatever remnants remain. The Swedish government will agree to pay all expenses of such a trip. It's believed that Andree's expedition crossed the North Polar Circle 12 years before Commander Robert Peary reached the North Pole. Reverend Dr. Turkattle, a missionary in charge of northern Saskatchewan and the Mackenzie River District, speaks Cree, Chippewayan, and Blackfeet fluently and understands the native language, and he lives near Reindeer Lake. Reverend Turkattle visited his new territory, accompanied by Chippewayans, and it took 8 days to get there. He carried a small revolver, which triggered a conversation with the natives. Turkattle would show them how it could kill birds flying about. Then a couple of the natives had a conversation. Quote, "That looks like the thing that white man had," end quote, said one of the natives to his companions. Quote, "Yes," end quote, returned the other. Quote, "What white man?" end quote, asked Turkettle. The natives said that, quote, "a white house had fallen from the sky, that it was covered with ropes, and that 3 men were in it," end quote. They told Turkettle where the house, aka balloon, had fallen, that the men in the balloon had been very hungry and had died shortly thereafter. The natives utilized the ropes from the balloon and were using them. It was now Turkettle's turn to theorize, saying he thought that the explorers had shot some sort of animal after arriving, and the natives got angry about it. Irvine from the Hudson Bay Company would say that the natives in his district also told him about the balloon, that it had been flying very low, and they had watched it for hours before it descended, with 3 men in it. These natives, according to Irvine, had some of the books that were originally in the balloon's baskets, records kept by Andree of the trip. Again, knowing what we know now, none of that is possible, unless it was some other expedition. August 1910. Swedish government representative has arrived in Alberta, Canada, and will leave for northern Canada to look into the disappearance and possible killing of the explorers. May 1914. Things just did not happen quickly in these days, although let's be honest, up in the Arctic Circle, probably not much happens quickly except changes in weather. But it's believed that the Andree expedition balloon has finally been found in a forest in eastern Siberia, according to a telegram. No. 1916. A recounting of that launch day would be published, noting it had been 19 years for some sort of news. It wasn't until August 1930 when we finally get answers, 33 years later. A Norwegian Arctic expedition led by Dr. Horn on the vessel Brattvaag would find the bodies of Solomon Andree, Knut Frankel, and Nils Strindberg. He would admit it was by chance that they stopped at the site. They had noticed a school of walruses playing in the area and decided to make camp. Not to watch them play, but to do other things. Sending 2 men for water, the men came upon a stream, and then found an oddly shaped mound and a tin can. Investigating further, they found a boat, then a boatswain's hook, which had engraved Andree's Polar Expedition 1896. They immediately took the findings to Dr. Horn, who ordered a party to the spot to search what appeared to be the last camp of the explorers and bring back any items. They were located on White Island. There were discovered 2 books that are now with the ship, which will hopefully tell the story of the first attempt to cross the North Pole, what brought the balloon down, and hopefully some clues as to what happened then to the explorers. One of the books is allegedly the balloon's log, which it's hoped contains coordinates of their travels. The other book is a personal diary of Andree's. Both books were, of course, frozen, so no attempts were made to open them at this point of discovering them. Other relics retrieved were 2 sledges, a boat, a harpoon, cooking items. No tent or the balloon was found. Well-worn moccasins and other equipment were found, indicating they had been used for some time. Rifles and some kind of instruments were placed at Andree's side. It's believed that perhaps he had lived the longest, but that is just conjecture at this point. 2 of the bodies, including Andree's, were perfectly preserved. The third, which had been partially sheltered from the ice in the small boat, was deteriorated. With these first look-sees at the bodies and the camp, it was believed that the men had lived for some time after being forced down. Polar bear carcass had been found at the site to show that perhaps at some point they did have fresh meat. Dr. Horn, the expedition scientist to find the bodies, did not believe that the balloon had ever landed on White Island. He thinks that the trio arrived here by walking or by boat. Admiral Richard Byrd would say, quote, "Andree and his expedition have always fascinated me tremendously. I always believed that he had the right conception of the best method for polar exploration, but unfortunately he did not have the equipment. He was a man of great vision and great daring. I am particularly pleased to learn that he left a diary. A man like Andree would find some way to leave a scientific record for posterity. Its contents should be of great value and extraordinary interest." End quote. Another man would speak of how he was supposed to have been on the Andree expedition but had arrived 2 days too late to go. Captain Evelyn Briggs Baldwin, meteorologist and member of the second Perry expedition, quote, "If I had not been late, the course of events might have been different. If he were alive again, I would volunteer to go with him. The fact that their bodies were reached makes clear that if an icebreaker, a ship capable of breaking through swaths of ice, had been sent after them, they could have been rescued." End quote. He also recounts how Andree had originally planned to fly in 1896, but decided against it because of the winds. Andree had been ridiculed for it. But Baldwin would say, quote, "That brought terrific adverse criticism upon him. I knew the dangers he had faced, and wrote him expressing confidence. That was the beginning of a faithful correspondence between us. When he started preparations to try again the next year, I wrote, volunteering to accompany him." End quote. Baldwin kept Andree's response to that, which was fear that the balloon basket may be too crowded, until Andree's meteorologist had decided not to go. Quote, "That left the room in the basket. I knew he would take me. I was on my way north the next day. Andree had gone just 24 hours before I got there." End quote. He also theorizes that at launch, Andree lost the drag rope, which would have been used to regulate the cruising altitude of the ship. A memorial was erected by the Horn Arctic expedition where they found the bodies. Dr. Horn said, quote, "Before we left the spot, we built a cairn, surmounted by a pole on a hill just behind the camp. It is easy to see and will make it possible for future visitors to find the place without trouble. In the cairn, we put a bottle with a note written in Norwegian and English. The note said that it was here that the Norwegian Franz Josef Land expedition found the remains of the Swedish Andree expedition. There are plans to go back to search again, as he was fairly sure there are still items to be found that would have been too difficult to remove with so much snow and ice. They are expected back in Norway in September with the bodies." Dr. James Gore of the National Geographic Society, which, according to my high school yearbook, I had every intention of taking photographs for by the age of 27. LOL. Dr. Gore would say about the expedition, quote, "They said he never had a chance. But chance or no chance, Andree was a man of an admirable courage. It was a mishap at the very outset of his flight that spelled an early doom. He must have foreseen his ultimate fate not long after the takeoff." End quote. This is referring to a current of air that had sent the launched boat down towards the sea, requiring Andree and his team to discharge some ballast to lift them up, unfortunately using some of the precious gas he would want to have. Quote, "The flight, if at any time capable of success, certainly was destined to fail after that." End quote. But Gore would continue on reflection, quote, "Andree was a brave man. He had to be, to start out blindly as he did, in a wind-tossed bag devoid of such modern devices as motors, radios, and rudders. The only means of steering he had was a curious apparatus of his own design, consisting of a wooden spar from which, by means of pulleys, trailed long drag ropes. Andree proposed course to alter his by letting out more rope on one end of the spar than on the other, so that the sea would create more drag on the longer rope. In addition, he had a mutton leg sail on each side of the basket, hoping thereby to take advantage of favorable winds. The balloon, with its house, rested on a 30-foot stone shelf at the base of a towering mound of rock and only about 80 feet from the sea. The jagged rocks between the shelf and the water were covered with a wide wooden runway smeared with black axle grease. When I saw that grease on the runway, I remarked to my assistant that Andree's greased his way to eternity. And I made that comment seriously, not humorously. I am convinced that it was a current of descending air sweeping down from the top of the hill rather than any fouling of the drag lines, as has been recently suggested. He's looking at you, Captain Baldwin, that caused the balloon to dip towards the water just after it was launched. I was told that Andree and his companions quickly threw over considerable ballast, with the result that the bag rose to a great height, lifting the drag lines out of the water. With the lines out of the sea, steering was impossible. So Andree released some of the hydrogen that he had sought to preserve so carefully. The balloon then settled down again, and when the craft disappeared on the horizon, it was progressing favorably in a wind blowing from the south." End quote. Then Gore would say, quote, "Andree's last words seemed prophetic in view of his fate. When one of the men on the shore asked when a message could be expected, Andree replied, in 30 days or never, end quote. What's sad is, and I didn't even think about this, was how many people who were friends and family of the explorers had died before they even knew the final outcome. Andree's mother had died before he even made the expedition, and his brother died a few years ago, let's say around 1927, from the time of this news article in 1930. Two sisters of Frankel are still alive at this time, but a younger brother has passed away. Strindberg's two brothers are alive to hear the news. September 2nd, 1930. The vessel Bratvåg, carrying the explorers' remains and Dr. Horn, the leader of the expedition, arrived in Tromsø, Norway. Large crowds were at the harbor, though there was no official ceremony at that point. Norwegian and Swedish experts boarded the ship to preliminarily look at the evidentiary items of the deaths. The general statement they made, quote, among the objects we found was photographic apparatus marked Andree's Polar Expedition No. 1, 2 ice sledges, a pair of high boots, instruments, an anemometer, a star map, and a piece of canvas, which possibly was part of a tent. Some bones also were discovered, but we have not yet ascertained if they were human, end quote. Dr. Horn theorizes that the trio died of exhaustion and slept themselves into death. He believes they walked and rowed in fragile boats some 180 miles across ice and icy water from where their balloon had come down. He believes they may have lived a few months, subsisting on birds and a bear for food. Let's just say that the bodies were not fully intact, which, let's be real, in that part of the world and any part of the world that's more remote, not surprising. On examination of his remains in the Tromsø hospital would find that not only had they found in the camp a diary plus the logbook, but that Andree had 2 additional notebooks wrapped up in an undershirt and frozen to his back. Perhaps he realized that the end was coming, so he carefully wrapped the notebooks to protect them as much as he could before lying on them. As of yet, we still don't know what any of these read, if any can be read given time and the elements. Unfortunately, what was also found was that the remains of what they thought was Frankel wasn't. It was a polar bear. So, of course, the question now becomes, what had happened to Frankel? Had he perished somewhere else, perhaps where the balloon had wrecked? Somewhere else on the island? By something else? Sadly, Strindberg's body was identified by one of his brothers. Though they were already certain of Andree's body, they would send a couple of professors to verify Andree's remains as being him. Also, the clothes had identifying information on them, which helped as well. September 3rd. One of the diaries found against his back is cover to cover with legible writing in pencil and looks to possibly be about the journey on foot over the ice. The second one only had some geographical observations on the first pages, and the rest was blank. September 5th. Apparently, the last pages of the diary are illegible due to the poor condition of the diary. The trio arrived on White Island September 5th, 1897, after having trudged through ice and icy water since mid-July to get to land. However, nothing more can be read starting September 5th, 1897. Horn still intends to go back to the site to see what else could be found, including finding the body of Frankel. Unofficially, because they are still keeping the diary content secret, but supposedly the balloon at descent 12:30 p.m. on July 13th, just 46 hours after it had launched. Earlier that day was when they had sent out a carrier pigeon with the message, "Good journey northward." So, what happened between the time of the carrier pigeon with a happy-sounding message and the balloon's descent? Was it a sudden storm, hydrogen leak, or something else? September 9th, the bodies of Andree and Strindberg rest today, lying in state in a Tromsø church. September 11th. So this was interesting. A photograph that had been taken of Dr. Horn's expedition was blown up by the Associated Press, and they found in the picture a skull rusting among rocks on White Island. It's like the worst kind of find the hidden objects game that they had in Highlights magazine when I was a kid. But they found the skull. Was it overlooked by the expedition? Sure. Excitement over finding relics and whatnot. Y'all missed something. So, is this Frankel? September 12th. Andree will hopefully be buried by his mother in Grenna, Sweden. Allegedly, just prior to his flight, he stood by his mother's grave and said, quote, "No matter where I may be found after death, I wish to be buried beside my mother," end quote. As noted earlier, she died just weeks before Andree's expedition started. September 16th. So, if I'm being honest, the deal with Frankel's body is very confusing, as reported in the newspapers. The vessel Ipsjorn arrived to Tromsø, Norway, with what were allegedly the remains of Knut Frankel, escorted by the government steamer Michael Sars and the Swedish gunboat Svenskund. The bones held in a coffin were immediately on arrival taken to the hospital for examination. This expedition not only had retrieved what it believed to be Frankel, but also some other items that had been left there, such as maps and plans, one of which was a map on which is traced in red the journey of the trio from day to day, sometimes traveling forward or backward at nature's whim. Frankel's body, if that's him, had been frozen firmly into the ground. Additionally found were various sewing articles and spools of cotton, $80 in American gold and silver coins, the expedition's money box with stacks of Russian Tsarist coins, as they thought they could wind up in Russia at some point, 3 pairs of glasses, including a pair of smoked glasses. I guess those are like sunglasses? A drawing Strindberg had done of a bird with wings spread, dated August 26, 1897. 9 small tins, 8 which were sealed, but the 9th was open in use of some sort of geological preparation, showing that the trio was working on science stuff. Photographic films were found in another tin box, and a lengthy report written by Strindberg, which is assumed to detail his account of things after July 1, 1897. Also found were some more items of Strindberg's, including letters still bearing Swedish stamps, a photograph of his fiancée, and pictures of previous balloon trips, and sadly, a birthday letter to Strindberg from his little brother that he was to open on September 4th, 1897, and he had. September 19th. The bodies of the 3 are now together again, each in a solid oak coffin, each on the ship Svenskund, the same ship that had taken them to the start of their journey 33 years earlier. The ship has left Tromsø and is heading to Stockholm, Sweden. Apparently, all 3 have now been positively identified, but manner of death is still unknown. Strindberg is theorized to have passed away first, his body having been found under a heap of stones, presumably built with human hands. September 20th. We're starting to hear about the diary's contents, what they're able to read. The launch of the balloon was recorded with high hopes, but then bad things began to happen. The balloon's gas bag leaked. The balloon and its accessories became weighted down with ice and frost. It lost its buoyancy and would bump on the ice, becoming very difficult to manage. That night, Andree kept watch and would record, quote, "We have not had any sleep or been allowed to rest from the repeated bumping, and we probably could not have stood it much longer. All 3 of us must have rest. If either of the others should succumb, it might be because I had tired them out," end quote. It's a bit unclear if they landed purposely. It sounded like that was the intention, or if they were forced to. But between July 14th and 21st, they were encamped on the ice and were planning to take one of the sledges to find land, preferably Franz Josef Land. Of course, people are wondering why they would go there rather than to head to Spitsbergen, where there were food depots and at least some people, but they didn't. If you're not there and in it, it's hard to say what you would do or could have done were you in the same situation. From the Brownsville Herald, September 20th, 1930. Quote, "The doomed men struggled on day after day, crossing ice crevasses and traversing by means of a small canvas boat deep pools of fresh water which they found on the ice between them and their goal. Each of the 3 men had their experience with falling into these pools, but all kept up their spirits, laughing and joking in the face of adversity. Frankel and Strindberg developed diarrhea, and both suffered from bruised feet. The irony of that long march did not appear at first, but on August 4th they knew from observation as to their position that while traveling east, the ice was drifting westward at an even greater rate. It was the story of the frog in the well, falling back the distance of 3 hops for every single hop, upward and out of his dilemma." End quote. They turned and headed to 7 islands off Spitsbergen to find the caches of food and supplies as their own food was running out. They did kill some polar bears for fresh meat, and with each kill, the prospects brightened. Until they didn't see bears for days, and then things seemed more dire. But as he traveled, the scientist in Andree was piqued, picking off bits of clay and moss off of ice hummocks in an attempt to look at, in the future, how ocean ice drifts. Sometimes they would be forced to row in their boat, which was a welcome respite from walking. But it would come to Andree's realization that they were not going to get to the 7 islands, and the weather was getting colder. September 17, 1897, they sighted White Island, the first land they had seen since July 11th. The following days, still on the ice, they killed more animals for food and believed that they may be able to make the food last until April. They built an ice cabin which was called the Home. Well, things sound like, not great, but better than they were. But that wouldn't last long. The ice floe on which they were living cracked, separating their food and their supplies into small chunks of ice. They were able to gather most of it up, but it was time to get off of this ice and get to White Island, true land. The diary stopped there, with a comment by Andree, quote, "With such companions, everything will go on all right in almost any circumstances," end quote. Apparently, Andree's diary stops on October 2nd, 1897, when the ice broke beneath their floating camp and the trio had to get to White Island. After October 17th, 1897, Strindberg was not able to write anything more. Apparently, when they finally got to White Island, they were exhausted and sick. They tried to build a shelter with driftwood and covered by some of the ballooned fabric they had brought with them. So people are questioning, if they were making camp, why wasn't more of their things around them and available to use? Were they already sensing that things were not going well? Did they get ptomaine poisoning from canned food, which was not quite as sanitary as canned food today? Legal experts reported to the government that all of the relics from the expedition are the property of the heirs of the explorer, absent any instructions that could have been left by the explorers themselves. Apparently, though, the rights of authors/explorers ceased after a 30-year lapse. Yes, the property is the heirs, but the government has the right to publish the diaries and whatever else, I guess, without the heirs having to consent due to the lapse in time from when they were first written. But publishing these items could not be for financial gain, but for the general interest in science. September 23rd. The ships carrying the bodies to Sweden from Tromsø, Norway, stopped in Alesund, Norway, as crowds assembled to greet the so-called funeral ship as it passed by. Sailors standing at attention on deck. Church bells tolling a welcome to the remains of the explorer. October 6th. The ship Svenskund arrived today in Sweden from Tromsø, carrying the bodies of the explorers. The ship, escorted by 2 torpedo boats. King Gustav claimed the bodies of the explorers now back in their homeland. 100,000 people paid homage in the pouring rain, as King Gustav of Sweden lay wreaths upon the coffins, and a 20-gun salute was fired. The explorers will lie in state for a little while longer before being cremated. In reading a kind of summary article from 1943, there is still conjecture about what happened to them. Strindberg is still thought to have died first, thinking he had left camp to hunt, fell through the ice and drowned. The pair found his body and buried it under stones to try to keep predators from getting it. Andree, when he had passed away, had been wearing plenty of warm clothing, as had Frankel. 2 polar bear skins were also handy. On the Brattvåg Horn expedition, when the bodies were first discovered, Dr. Horn had examined their cooking stove and found it still had kerosene and still worked. In the canvas boat, they had remains from a bear that they had cut up and still could be eaten. Their guns were in good condition and still had ammunition. So what happened? We may never know. Dr. Andree's diary observations were published but are out of print. Various other books have been written about the expedition as well. The Karolinska Institute was, in 2020, working on new methods to try to read the unreadable parts of the diary. I would love to see that. I hope you enjoyed this story. See you.